This morning I was reading Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, where Paul says, "In all things we commend ourselves as ministers of God." Paul's way of life was intended to demonstrate that, first and foremost, he was a servant of God. I don't see how this couldn't be convicting, or at least marginally challenging. Because I have to, when I read that text, I have to ask myself, do the things in my life, do they demonstrate that fundamentally I am a servant of God, or are my activities primarily self-serving? I certainly want my life to demonstrate that Christ is Lord and that I'm his servant. I've tried to live my life through last 25 years or so of adulthood in that way. And I guess I could say that it might be a bit easier for me because, or at least it's a bit easier for me to appear as though I'm living as a servant of God because my vocation is, quote, the service of the Lord, as a minister of the gospel, as a pastor of a local church. I don't want my service, though, to God to be in appearance only. And thinking about this, I remember back to the early days of ministry when I was just beginning to teach the Bible. I was teaching through the scriptures to a group of middle schoolers at the church that I now pastor. And Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and then again in chapter 11, he says, imitate me. In chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, he says, imitate me as I also imitate Christ. And I remember telling those who I was teaching at the time that one day, I hope that I'll be able to say it with genuine sincerity, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But at the time, I think I was at least humble enough to recognize, as probably about 19, 20-year-old speaking to a group of junior hires, that I probably couldn't say that my life is a great or perfect example of imitating Christ. I'm not sure that I would be audacious enough to say now, like, my life is a perfect example of what it ought to be to imitate Christ. Paul in Philippians chapter 3, verse 17, he says, "Brethren, join in following my example and note those who so walk as you have us for a pattern." Although I definitely aspire to live my life in a manner that is worthy of emulation, where I could say, imitate me as I imitate Christ and use my life as a pattern for how you ought to live your life, that's a difficult thing to say. But whether I say it or not, because of the position that I have as a pastor, as a senior pastor, there are people watching me and they're mirroring my way of life in some way, regardless of my desire that they do or they not do that. So that really actually challenges me to live with honesty and integrity. The sign that I have over my shoulder here, it says, "Integrity is doing what is right when no one is watching." And it's been my desire, my aim, to live my life with honesty and integrity and self-control for many, many years. And I certainly make that my aim. I'm not perfect at that, but that's what I've sought to impart to my kids and to those that I lead, whether it's church or wherever else I find myself leading people. All that to say, I would encourage you to try to do the same, whether you consider yourself a servant of God as a leader or not within the church. It's highly unlikely that you will be a perfect pattern of Christ-likeness, but I'm certain that your example will be better if you aim at being an example. If you aim at living with integrity and honesty, your example will be better if you make that your aspiration than if you hadn't. And perhaps remind yourself that you are a minister of God, even if you are in law enforcement, medicine, or education, construction, technology, find yourself in investing or retail, the trades, wherever you are, whatever you are doing. Paul would say to you, as he did to the church at Colossae, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, for we serve the Lord Christ. You are a servant of Christ if you are a follower of Christ. And as a servant of Christ, that's how you are introducing yourself every single day, whether your job is in vocational ministry or not. Something to think about, something to aspire to. I hope you'll consider it. We'll see you next time.